On a plain by the sea, in the autumn of 490 BCE, approximately 10,000 Athenian and Plataean soldiers ran toward the largest empire in the world. They did not walk, they ran, for approximately a mile, across open ground, toward a Persian army that outnumbered them significantly and that was equipped with archers whose arrows had decimated armies before this one. They ran at a pace that their enemies had never seen infantry use in approach and that the Persians, watching it, apparently did not immediately understand as a tactical decision rather than a symptom of madness. It was not madness. It was one of the most precisely calculated tactical decisions in the history of ancient warfare, and it worked. The Persian army that had been threatening Athens, that had reduced the city of Eretria to rubble and enslaved its population 6 days earlier, that was positioned to march on Athens after destroying the force Santimitid, was defeated on that plain in a battle that lasted, perhaps a few hours, and that changed the direction of the ancient world in ways that the people who fought it could not have fully understood in the moment of fighting. The Battle of Marathon in September 490 BCE is one of those historical events whose significance has been acknowledged so consistently across so many centuries that the acknowledgement itself has become a form of cultural reflex. The automatic assignment of world historical importance to a name and a date that everyone learns and the fewer people fully examine. Western civilization. Saved. By 10,000 Greeks running toward Aros on a beach in Attica. The shorthand is so condensed that it has become almost meaningless, the phrase unable to contain the specific weight of what it is being asked to carry. This is the story of what actually happened at Marathon, why it happened, how it happened, and why the assessment of its significance, for once, turns out to be justified rather than exaggerated. To understand Marathon, you have to begin not in Greece but in Persia, and not in 490 BCE but 20 years earlier, with the specific sequence of events that produced the Persian decision to send an expedition against Athens and Eretria in 490. The Persian Empire under Darius was the largest political entity the ancient world had produced, stretching from the Aegean coast of Ionia in the west to the Indus River in the east, from Scythia in the north to Egypt in the south. It had been built in 2 generations by Cyrus the Great and his successors through a combination of military conquest, diplomatic absorption, and the sophisticated administrative machinery of the satrapy system that allowed the empire to govern dozens of different peoples and cultures under a unified political framework. The Ionian Greeks of the Aegean coast, who had been brought under Persian control in the mid-6th century BCE, were not a uniformly contented subject population. Greek civic culture, with its emphasis on political participation, its suspicion of absolute authority, and its specific identity investment in the independence of the polis, did not sit comfortably within the Persian imperial framework even when that framework was tolerant by ancient standards, and the Persian imperial governance was sometimes tolerant and sometimes not. The specific trigger for the Ionian revolt of 499 BCE, the uprising that is the direct ancestor of Marathon, was a combination of genuine political grievance and the ambitions of specific Ionian leaders, particularly Aristagoras of Miletus, whose personal political situation made rebellion a rational option regardless of its prospects. The Ionian revolt lasted from 499 to 494 BCE and ended with the Persian reconquest of Ionia and the destruction of Miletus, the largest and the most prosperous of the Ionian Greek cities, in 494. In the course of the revolt, the Ionian Greeks had appealed to their mainland Greek kinsmen for support. Sparta, the dominant land power of mainland Greece, had declined after the Spartan king Cleomenes reportedly decided the distance was too great for the campaign to be practical. Athens had sent 20 ships. Eretria, a city on the island of Euboea north of Athens, had sent 5. These were not large contingents. The Athenian and the Eretrian contributions to the Ionian revolt were militarily modest and ultimately ineffective. But their symbolic and political significance was enormous from the Persian perspective. They represented the intervention of mainland Greek states in a Persian internal affair, the material support of our revolt against imperial authority by polities that had not been asked for their opinion and that did not acknowledge Persia's right to demand their submission. Darius, by several ancient accounts, was told of the Athenian intervention and asked who these Athenians were, then instructed a servant to remind him 3 times a day at dinner that he should punish the Athenians, a story that may be apocryphal but that accurately captures the political reality. That Athens had made itself a specific object of Persian punitive intention. The immediate pretext for the expedition of 490 was provided by the political situation in Athens itself, specifically by the involvement of the exiled Athenian tyrant Hippias, who had been driven from Athens in 510 BCE and had subsequently spent time at various courts including the Persian court at Susa, presenting himself as the legitimate ruler of Athens and soliciting Persian support for his restoration. Hippias knew the geography of Attica, knew the political landscape of Athens, and he was with the Persian expedition of 490 as a guide and as the intended puppet ruler if a restored Persian-backed tyranny in Athens once the military work was done. The Persian expedition was commanded by 2 generals, Datis, Amedei, and Artaphernes, a nephew of Darius, and it carried a force of perhaps 20 to 30,000 men, the scholarly estimates varying considerably from the ancient sources will give larger numbers. The force was a genuine professional army with cavalry, archers, and the experienced infantry who had fought in the reconquest of Ionia and in the campaign across the Aegean that preceded the Marathon landing. It was not the full might of the Persian Empire. It was a punitive expedition designed to punish Athens and Eretria, restore Persian client rulers, and demonstrate to the Greek world that Persian imperial power could reach even to the Greek mainland. The expedition moved through the Aegean, subduing the islands it encountered, and arrived at Euboea to deal with Eretria first. Eretria was besieged, betrayed from within after 7 days by 2 leading citizens who opened the city's gates, and destroyed. Its temples were burned as repayment for the burning of the Persian temple at Sardis during the Ionian revolt, and its population was enslaved and transported east to Persia. The fate of Eretria was a demonstration of what Athens would face if it did not submit, and it was precisely the kind of demonstration that the Persian expedition had been designed to provide. After Eretria, the Persian fleet sailed around the northern tip of Euboea and down the coast of Attica to Marathon, a coastal plain approximately 40 kilometers northeast of Athens. Marathon was chosen for specific reasons. It was one of the few locations in Attica with a beach suitable for landing a large cavalry force and the space necessary to deploy the Persian army's numerical advantages. It was also recommended by Hippias, who knew the terrain and who reportedly had a specific reason for choosing Marathon related to a prophecy or an omen from his own experience at the site. The specific geography of the Marathon plain, with the sea on the east, the mountains on the west, and the open cultivated land of the plain between them, was ideal for the kind of open battle in which Persian cavalry and the archery could operate effectively. Athens' response to the Persian landing was rapid and the decision it required was among the most consequential in the city's history. The Athenian assembly voted to march out and meet the Persians at Marathon rather than wait for a siege of the city itself. This decision was not universally supported within Athens. The source tradition records significant political division, with some Athenians advocating for waiting behind the city walls and the others, including the general and the political leader Miltiades, advocating for marching immediately. The advocates for immediate action prevailed, partly because the alternative, waiting in Athens while the Persians burned the countryside, was politically unsustainable, and partly because the specific argument that waiting would give the Persian fifth column within Athens time to organize a betrayal of the kind that had destroyed Eretria had real force, given that Hippias and his supporters had demonstrated connections within the city. Athens sent a runner to Sparta requesting military assistance. The runner was a man named Pheidippides, one of a class of professional long-distance runners called hemrodromoi, who served as messengers between Greek city-states, and he covered the approximately 250 kilometers from Athens to Sparta in approximately 2 days. An achievement of physical endurance that the ancient sources record with matter-of-fact admiration, the specific accomplishment of a running culture that treated such distances as demanding but achievable. The Spartans, told of the Persian landing and the Athenian appeal, expressed their intention to send assistance but explained that they were currently in the middle of a religious festival, the Carneia, which prohibited military mobilization until the full moon. They would come after the full moon. The full moon was approximately 10 days away. Athens would have to fight Marathon without Sparta, or not fight it at all. The only Greek state that sent troops without waiting was Plataea, a small city in Boeotia that had established a close diplomatic relationship with Athens over the preceding decades and that sent its entire military force, approximately 1,000 men, to join the Athenian army at Marathon. The Plataea contingent represents one of the most extraordinary examples of allied loyalty in ancient history, and one of the most consistently underacknowledged contributions to one of the most famous battles in the ancient world. The 1,000 Plataeans who marched to Marathon knowing that they were going toward a Persian army orders of magnitude larger than their own city could field, because Athens was their ally and the Athens had asked. The Athenian force that marched to Marathon was commanded by a board of 10 generals, the strategoi, with an 11th official, the polymarchos or war archon, Callimachus, holding a coordinating role and a casting vote in military councils. Miltiades was one of the 10 generals. He had previously served as a tyrant in the Thracian Chersonese under Persian suzerainty, and he had fled to Athens after the Ionian revolt's failure, bringing with him specific knowledge of Persian military methods, Persian command culture, and the specific tactical question that the Marathon battle required answering, which was how a smaller Greek infantry force could defeat a larger Persian force in an open engagement. The two armies faced each other across the Marathon plain for several days before the engagement. The exact duration is disputed in the ancient sources. The Persian army was deployed on the plain in the standard fashion of a force that expected its opponents to come to it, its archers forward and its cavalry available for flanking movements once the infantry engagement was joined. The Greek army occupied a position at the foot of the hills bordering the plain's western edge, close enough to the Persians to prevent a rapid outflanking movement but far enough from them to prevent an immediate assault. During this period of facing, Miltiades made the arguments to the other generals and to Callimachus that eventually produced a decision to attack. The specific arguments that the ancient sources give him are worth examining. He argued that waiting gave time for the Persian fifth column in Athens to organize a betrayal. He argued that the morale of the Greek force, which was fighting at the extreme edge of its willingness to face the Persian army at all, would deteriorate with delay. And he argued, most importantly for the specific battle that followed, that there was a tactical method available that could neutralize the Persian cavalry, the most dangerous component of the Persian military force, and that this method required attacking before the cavalry was fully deployed and positioned. The tactical question of the Meresan battle has generated more scholarly analysis than almost any other aspect of ancient military history, and the core puzzle is this. The Persian cavalry does not appear in any of the ancient accounts of the actual fighting at Meresan. The force that the Greeks defeated that day was an infantry force with archers, not the combined cavalry and the archery force that the Persian army actually possessed and that had been the instrument of Persian military dominance across the preceding decades. Where was the cavalry? The most widely accepted modern interpretation, derived from a passage in Herodotus that has been analyzed extensively, is that the Persian cavalry had been embarked on the fleet for transport around Capesunium to attack Athens directly while the main Persian force held the Athenian army at Meresan, a strategic movement that would bypass the battle and achieve the strategic objective of capturing Athens regardless of the Meresan engagement's outcome. This interpretation has the advantage of explaining both the cavalry's absence at Meresan and the specific urgency that the Athenians post-battle marched back to Athens before the Persian fleet could complete its movement around Capesunium expressed. If the cavalry was being embarked when the Greek attack began, then the timing of the attack was not a response to Persian aggression, but a preemptive strike against a force that was in the process of dividing its most dangerous component temporarily unavailable. Miltiades, who understood Persian operational methods from his years as proximity to Persian power in the Chersonese, would have recognized the moment of cavalry embarkation as the specific window of tactical opportunity that the Greek attack required. The battle formation that the Greeks used at Meresan was a deliberate tactical adaptation to the specific threat of Persian archery. A normal grid phalanx advanced at a walking patch of men trying to maintain formation, an approach that would expose the Persian archers for an extended period during which the arrows would take their toll before the formations met. Miltiades extended his phalanx flanks while deliberately thinning his center, creating a formation that was longer than normal and weaker in the middle than the tactical orthodoxy of the period would endorse. And then he ordered it to run. The running approach was calculated to reduce the time the phalanx spent with an effective arrow range to the minimum achievable, approximately 1 minute of running across the killing ground rather than several minutes of walking. Ancient Greek infantry running in formation with bronze shield, bronze helmet, bronze greaves, and the iron-tipped spear, equipment weighing approximately 30 to 40 pounds. For approximately a mile at Combat Pache, is a physical achievement that modern reenactors have tested and confirmed as possible for trained soldiers, though intensely demanding. The men at Meresan were trained soldiers. They ran. The Persian archers loosed their arrows at the running phalanx and the hitmen. The ancient sources acknowledge casualties in the approach, but the proportion of the force that fell in the approach was small compared to what would have fallen in a walking approach across the same ground, and the psychological impact of a running formation that did not stop, did not break, and was visibly going to reach the Persian line, had effects on the Persian formation that the ancient sources reflect in the speed of the Persian collapse on the flanks. The battle itself, once the formations met, produced the specific result that Miltiades' deployment had been designed to generate. The strengthened Greek flanks struck the Persian flanks with overwhelming force and drove them back rapidly, while the thin Greek center yielded to the Persian push in the middle, bending back rather than breaking. The Persian commanders, seeing their flanks driven back and their center advancing, did not recognize the trap until it had closed. The two victorious Greek wings wheeled inward on the Persian center, taking it in both flanks simultaneously. The Persian force that had been advancing victorious in the center finding itself suddenly enveloped from both sides. The Persian formation broke, not gradually, catastrophically, in the specific way that ancient infantry formations broke when the psychological cohesion of soldiers fighting in mescantic finally failed the individual survival calculation reasserting itself over the collective unit calculation that military discipline imposed. The Persians ran toward their ships. The Greeks pursued. The pursuit to the ships was the most dangerous phase of the battle for the Greeks and the phase in which their casualties were concentrated. The specific vulnerability of a pursuing force when the pursued reach a position they can defend long enough to regroup. 7 Persian ships were captured at the waterline. The rest got away, carrying the bulk of the Persian fleet and the Persian army's survivors, and sailed south and then around Capesunium toward Athens. The famous run from Meresan to Athens, the 26 miles of the modern Meresan race, is attributed in the ancient sources to a messenger named Phidippides, though the timeline and the specific identity of the messenger are debated by scholars who note that Herodotus does not explicitly connect Phidippides' pre-battle run to Sparta with a post-battle run to Athens. What is not debated is that the Athenian army itself, after the battle, marched approximately 40 kilometers back to Athens in full equipment, covering the distance in time to be visibly present and defending the city when the Persian fleet arrived at the Bay of Phaleron and its commanders, seeing the Athenian army in position on the shore, decided not to land and withdrew instead to Asia. The entire Persian expedition had failed. Eretria was destroyed, its population enslaved, its temples burned. That was a Persian success. Athens had fought, won, and defended itself. That was a Greek success of a magnitude that the ancient world had difficulty processing, not because it was militarily incomprehensible but because it was politically incomprehensible. The Persian Empire had been defeated by a city-state. The greatest military power the ancient world had seen had been beaten by citizens. The aftermath of Meresan unfolded on multiple timescales. In the immediate term, Athens was safe and Darius' first punitive expedition had failed, a failure that required a response and that Darius began planning for immediately. The response was interrupted by a revolt in Egypt and then by Darius Des in 486 BCE, and the task of punishing Athens passed to his son Xerxes, whose expedition of 480 BCE, 10 years after Meresan, produced the battles of Thermopylae and the Salamis and the Plataea in the final failure of Persian attempts to conquer the Greek mainland. Meresan's contribution to what followed cannot be precisely quantified, but its direction is visible. The battle demonstrated that Persian infantry could be defeated by Greek infantry in open engagement, a demonstration that changed the psychological equation for the Greek coalition that assembled to resist Xerxes' invasion 10 years later. The men who fought at Meresan, the Marathonomachai as they were called in Athenian culture, occupied a specific place of honor in the city's memory for generations, the specific moral capital of men who had done the impossible and whose having done it made subsequent generations believe that the impossible was achievable. The political consequences for Athens were transformative. The victory confirmed the democratic system that Cleisthenes had established in the years before Meresan, the institutional arrangement that had given every Athenian citizen a stake in the city's defense and whose successful performance in the crisis of 490 BCE demonstrated that democratic citizen armies could fight effectively, a demonstration whose implications for the subsequent century of Athenian political and cultural achievement are difficult to overstate. The cultural consequences of Meresan, the specific weight it acquired in Greek and in Western historical consciousness as the moment when Greek values, political freedom, civic participation, the capacity of citizens to defend their own polis against imperial power, defeated imperial despotism in open battle, are consequences that had not been planned or intended by anyone who fought in the battle. The Athenians who ran across the Meresan Plain in September 490 BCE were trying to survive a Persian punitive expedition. They were not conscious of defending Western civilization or establishing a precedent for democratic military capability or providing the foundational myth for a specific understanding of what political freedom requires its beneficiaries to be willing to do. They were running toward arrows because the alternative was to wait for the arrows to come to them. The plain of Meresan is still there. The Soros, the burial mound of the Athenian dead, is still visible at the site, its height above the surrounding plain a specific monument to the number of men who died in that specific part of the battle. And they were buried together in the specific honor of the common grave that Athens gave to its Meresan dead. The mound has been served for 2,500 years. It is grass-covered now, and in the spring the surrounding plain is full of flowers, and the sea is visible from the mound in the specific direction from which the Persian fleet came and from which it withdrew. The Persian dead were buried in a trench. The trench has never been found. The 192 Athenians who died at Meresan, the number that Herodotus gives and that the ancient accounts treat as notably small given the scale of the engagement, are in the Soros. The Plataeans who died, whose number the ancient sources do not give with precision, are in their own separate burial nearby. The presence in the landscape of Meresan testimony to the specific alliance that brought the entire military force of a small Boeotian city to stand with Athens against the Persian Empire. The specific runner of the ancient legend, whether Phidippides or someone else, who's run from Meresan to Athens carrying the news of the victory and then dying of exhaustion after delivering it, has been commemorated in the modern Meresan race since 1896. The distance standardized at approximately 42 kilometers in 1921 to correspond with the distance run at the 1908 London Olympics. Every Meresan race run anywhere in the world carries in its distance the physical echo of the messenger, who ran from a beach in Arcady, a city that needed to hear the news that was worth dying to deliver. The plain is quiet most of the year. Birds and the insects and the specific sounds of agricultural activity in the olive groves and the vegetable plots that the Meresan plain now supports rather than the grain fields of the ancient period. In the spring, when the flowers are on the hills above the plain and the sea below is the specific blue of the Aegean in April, it is possible to stand on the Soros and look across the plain toward the sea and think about what 10,000 men running across that ground believed they were doing, and whether they knew, or could have known, what those hours of running and fighting and dying and then running again would mean for the world that came after them. They could not have known. Nobody runs into battle with the knowledge of history's verdict on what they are doing. They knew what they were doing, which was running toward people who were trying to kill them, in defense of a city that was worth defending, because the alternative was to not run and to accept what not running meant. That is all it ever is. The world historical moment reduced to its human scale. 10,000 men making the individual decision to run rather than to wait. The consequence of that decision accumulated across 2,500 years into everything that the name Meresan now carries. The plain remembers them with grass and the flowers and the specific quiet of a landscape that outlasts everything that has ever happened on it. The mound is still there, the sea is still there, and somewhere beneath the soil of the Meresan plain, in the specific ground that absorbed the consequence of 10,000 men's decision to run, the evidence of that September morning in 490 BC waits with the patience of things that are in no more hurry, because they have already done everything that needs to be done.